He's not your son, Jeffrey. Derek is his father. If you can't deal with it, leave. The words sliced through the quiet kitchen like broken glass. Jeffrey didn't shout. He didn't flip the table or beg for answers. He just stared, first at Rebecca, then at the photo of 6-year-old George pinned on the fridge. Rebecca waited for anger. None came. Only that calm, terrifying silence. She thought he was broken. She had no idea he'd been waiting for this moment all along. Before we begin, please like, subscribe and tell me in the comments. Where are you watching from? United States, Canada, UK, Australia, Jamaica. Tulsa, Oklahoma, a city where everyone knew everyone, and whispers traveled faster than wind over the flat plains. Jeffrey Alden had built a quiet, respectable life there. A senior architect at a mid-sized firm, he wasn't rich, but he was steady. His home, a neat 2-story on the south edge of town, smelled of fresh coffee every morning and baby shampoo every night. Rebecca used to love that steadiness, until she didn't. Over the years, she'd grown restless, scrolling through lives of luxury on her phone, comparing herself to women who never packed lunches or clipped coupons. And somewhere along the way, admiration turned into resentment. That evening in late September, the confession came not with tears, but with arrogance. Jeffrey had come home early. He'd taken the afternoon off to pick up George's science fair project, the one with the solar system diorama. Rebecca was already in the kitchen, her phone face down, wine glass half empty. The air smelled faintly of something burning in the oven. He noticed her eyes first, cold, distant, like she'd made peace with whatever she was about to do. Then she said it. George isn't yours, Jeffrey. Derek is his father. If you can't deal with it, leave. At first, he thought she was joking. The words were too sharp, too rehearsed. Then he realized she wasn't breaking down, she was declaring victory. He blinked once, slowly, then set his keys on the counter. Rebecca waited for chaos, for him to shout, to accuse, to crumble. But Jeffrey just stood there, shoulders relaxed, face unreadable. He looked at her like a man finally seeing something that had been in front of him all along. That silence unnerved her. You heard me, she added, almost defensively. We can make this easy, or you can make it hard. Still nothing. Just quiet breathing, measured and calm. George's voice echoed from the living room. Laughter from a cartoon he didn't understand yet. That laughter hit Jeffrey harder than anything Rebecca could have said. His knees almost gave out, but he stayed upright, forcing his heart to beat evenly. He picked up the photo of George from the counter, the one from his last birthday. He traced the little boy's face with his thumb, then placed the frame down gently. I see, he whispered almost to himself. That was it. No argument. No threats. Just that. Then he walked to the hall, grabbed his coat and left the house. Tulsa nights had a way of feeling empty when you had nowhere to go. He drove with no direction, streetlights streaking across his windshield. He ended up in a parking lot outside a darkened office building, his firm's headquarters. He sat there for a long time, staring at nothing. The betrayal didn't come as a single blow. It came as fragments, every lie, every late night, every fake smile stitched together until the truth was undeniable. But Jeffrey wasn't the kind of man who reacted fast. He'd built houses, bridges, and lives brick by brick. He'd fix this one the same way, piece by piece, quietly. Because this wasn't news to him. He'd known for months. He'd seen the late-night messages on Rebecca's phone weeks ago. The same P initials. The same timing every time he worked late. He'd run a private DNA test when George was 4, one that had already told him the truth. But the result wasn't what broke him. What broke him was how Rebecca smiled at him afterward, pretending nothing was wrong. So he'd started preparing, slowly, methodically, the way only an architect could. He'd moved ownership of the house into a trust under his sister's name. He'd withdrawn his personal savings and placed them into a separate LLC. And he'd quietly started recording every conversation that hinted at deception. Rebecca thought she was winning a game. She didn't know the board had already been flipped. That night, Jeffrey didn't sleep. He sat at his desk, looking through a folder marked Alden Design Partnership. It was the firm he had co-founded with Derek 8 years ago. Derek, his best friend. his supposed brother, his son's real father. He flipped to a contract that Derek had signed without reading, one that transferred controlling interest of the firm in exchange for a loan Jeffrey had covered 2 years ago. Derek had never paid him back. In that one quiet moment, the plan began to take shape. He would let them think they'd won. He would let them build their empire on his silence. And when the time was right, he'd show them what real power looked like. Outside, the first hint of dawn stretched across the horizon, pale, cold, and patient. Jeffrey leaned back in his chair, exhaled, and smiled for the first time in weeks. The storm wasn't coming. It was already here, and he was the eye of it. He walked out that night without a word, but something in his silence made Rebecca shiver. Because deep down, she knew, the quiet ones are always the ones you should fear most. And if you've ever been underestimated, if someone thought your pain made you powerless, stay close. Because what Jeffrey does next will remind you why silence isn't surrender, it's strategy. Don't just watch, subscribe. Because stories like this aren't fiction. They're warnings. Tulsa's October wind had that sharp chill that made the air smell like rain and rusted fences. Rebecca thought Jeffrey had left for good. She told her friends he was too weak to face the truth. But she didn't know Jeffrey wasn't gone. He was watching. Every morning, he parked 2 blocks away and watched George walk to school with Rebecca. He'd wait until they were gone, then drive off to his office, acting as if life had gone on. To everyone else, he was just a man working late. But in truth, every hour was a step toward the quietest revenge the town had ever seen. Derek was still Jeffrey's business partner, running the client-facing side of Alden and Cross Design Studio. He didn't suspect anything. He thought Jeffrey was crushed, that he'd hand over the company shares soon. After all, Jeffrey's wife now belonged to him. In his arrogance, Derek forgot that some men build foundations deep enough to survive earthquakes. Jeffrey began spending time in the firm's archives. Late nights, locked doors, a cold cup of coffee beside him. He traced every contract, every deal, every number Derek had ever touched. It didn't take long before he found what he was looking for, evidence of Derek skimming client funds, funneling profits through shell accounts in his cousin's name. It was all there, buried in plain sight. He printed every page, filed it neatly into a folder, and labeled it Phase 1. Still, he said nothing. Back home, Rebecca played her part as if she were starring in a small-town soap opera. She had moved Derek into the house within 2 weeks. People whispered, but she didn't care. She said things like, Jeffrey was boring, I needed passion, and it's better for George this way. But even Derek noticed something off about her lately. The air in the house felt thick, heavy, as if the walls themselves remembered Jeffrey. And at night, when the floorboards creaked, Rebecca would wake suddenly, convinced someone was standing in the hallway. Paranoia was starting to bite. Meanwhile, Jeffrey's plan unfolded quietly. He met with a woman named Clara Jennings, a local journalist who'd once covered city zoning scandals. He showed her documents, corporate fraud, tax manipulation, and most importantly, a clause Derek didn't even remember signing. A contingency clause that gave Jeffrey full ownership of the company in the event of any ethical violation. Ethical violation, he repeated softly, sliding the evidence across the table. This should qualify, don't you think? Clara just stared at him. You're not going to publish this? Jeffrey smiled faintly. Not yet. I don't destroy people. I just let them dig their own graves first. A week later, Derek was bragging in the local golf club about landing a lucrative contract with a property developer in Oklahoma City. He didn't know that Jeffrey was the one who'd arranged that contract, through a third-party contact. It was a setup, a fake deal with fake accounts, all designed to document Derek's theft in real time. By the end of the month, Jeffrey had enough proof to make both Derek and Rebecca disappear socially, legally, and financially. But revenge, for him, wasn't about headlines. It was about timing. Then came the dinner. Rebecca invited Jeffrey to talk, the first time in weeks. She wore a silk dress and too much perfume, the kind of effort guilt disguises as confidence. Derek sat at the end of the table, relaxed, self-satisfied, sipping from Jeffrey's old whiskey glass. Jeffrey arrived late, calm, in a dark gray coat. He looked thinner, quieter, but not defeated. Rebecca expected a plea for reconciliation, maybe a breakdown. Instead, he just nodded, sat down, and said, "You wanted to talk?" The small talk stretched for minutes. Derek laughed, boasting about a business deal. Rebecca rolled her eyes. Jeffrey said little, only that half smile, the kind people wear when they know a secret no one else does. When the meal ended, Jeffrey stood, put his napkin down gently, and said, "Enjoy the house while you can." Then he walked out, leaving two confused faces behind. Rebecca laughed it off. Derek didn't. There was something about Jeffrey's tone, something that felt final. 3 days later, Derek received an email from the firm's accounting system. Access denied, ownership privileges revoked. He thought it was a mistake. But when he stormed into the office, every employee was standing, silent, watching Jeffrey calmly close his laptop. Without raising his voice, Jeffrey said, "You might want to check your accounts before you accuse anyone of theft." Then he left. Minutes later, Derek's face went pale. The accounts were frozen, the client contracts voided. Every document bore Jeffrey's name. Rebecca found out when Derek didn't come home that night. She called him over and over, but there was no answer. In the quiet of that evening, her own reflections started to look different, almost like she didn't recognize herself anymore. The confidence that once looked like control now looked like fear. For the first time since that confession, she began to realize Jeffrey hadn't been defeated. He'd been waiting. The next morning, the Tulsa paper ran a quiet headline buried halfway through the business section. Local partnership under investigation for financial irregularities. Derek's name was there. So was Rebecca's, listed as a potential beneficiary. And far away, Jeffrey sat in his truck by the Arkansas River Bridge, watching the water move slow and heavy beneath him. His hands didn't shake. His heart didn't race. The world thought he'd been destroyed. But in truth, he'd just begun to rebuild, on his own terms. That night, Rebecca woke up to a single text from an unknown number. "You shouldn't have burned the man who built the ground beneath you." Tulsa had begun to whisper. The kind of whispers that traveled through coffee shops and church foyers, polite but poisonous. Something had shifted, and somehow, every path led back to Jeffrey Alden. Rebecca first noticed it when a friend at her gym asked, too casually, "Hey, is it true Derek's business license got suspended?" She laughed it off, but her hands trembled when she went to check online. The news was small, almost hidden. Alden and Cross Design Studio under federal review for contract fraud. There it was in black and white. Derek's name attached to numbers he couldn't explain. Her phone buzzed. "Derek. They froze my accounts," he said, his voice raw. "I can't move a dime. Someone set me up." Rebecca's throat went dry. "Who?" He paused. "Who do you think?" For the first time, Rebecca understood that Jeffrey's silence had never been surrender. It had been calculation. And if there was one thing she'd forgotten, it was that Jeffrey didn't build things to collapse. He built them to last. The next morning, she drove to the office to confront him. The receptionist looked nervous when she saw her. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Alden," she said quietly. "He doesn't work here anymore." Rebecca frowned. "What do you mean?" "He doesn't need to. He owns it now." Her heart sank. The glass walls around her seemed to close in as she realized the truth. Derek hadn't just lost his job. He'd lost everything. Jeffrey had absorbed the company in silence, the way a calm tide swallows the shore. When she returned home that evening, Derek was gone. His closet half empty, his phone disconnected. On the kitchen table sat a single envelope. Inside was a printed copy of an email from Derek's lawyer. The subject line read, "Termination of Partnership Agreement." At the bottom, in small, neat letters, Jeffrey's signature stared back at her. Days turned into weeks. The air around Rebecca thickened with humiliation. The same friends who once envied her were now watching her like a slow-motion car crash. But worse than gossip was the silence from Jeffrey, that unbearable quiet that made her wonder if he'd already won. Then one afternoon, a knock came at her door. A woman stood there, mid-40s, calm, with a badge around her neck. "Mrs. Alden?" Rebecca nodded hesitantly. "I'm Agent Dorsey, Family Law Division. I need to ask you a few questions about your son's paternity test from 6 years ago." Rebecca froze. The agent continued, flipping through her file. The original test you submitted was flagged for irregularities. The lab reported altered data entries, possibly substituted samples. Rebecca's heart began to race. What are you saying? I'm saying, the woman said, looking up, that based on the verified retest results we've just received, Jeffrey Alden is the biological father of George. The sound left Rebecca's body. Her knees buckled slightly as she gripped the doorframe. Agent Dorsey closed her folder gently. We'll be contacting Mr. Alden soon. I suggest you do the right thing before this becomes a court matter. When the door shut, Rebecca stood in her living room, staring at George's toys scattered across the floor. Her mind replayed everything. The lie, the manipulation, the way she'd weaponized a test to control a man who'd already known the truth. She sank to the floor, shaking, realizing she hadn't just betrayed her husband. She tried to erase him. Across town, Jeffrey sat in his truck, watching the last light fade over the Arkansas River. He didn't feel triumph, not really. Just the dull ache of a man who'd finally run out of illusions. He'd already received the official paternity results days earlier. He could have used them immediately, but timing was everything. He wanted Rebecca to feel what silence truly meant, the kind that comes when no lie is left to hide behind. He leaned back in the seat, phone buzzing beside him. Claire Jennings, the journalist. Her message was short. It's all over town now. Derek fled the state. Rebecca's being served next week. You did it. Jeffrey typed a slow reply. No. I just stopped pretending. The next day, Rebecca showed up at the firm again. This time, she wasn't angry. She was shaking. She asked to see Jeffrey, begged almost, and they let her in. He was sitting behind his desk, calm as ever, reviewing blueprints. He didn't look up when she entered. I didn't know, she whispered. I was scared. I thought. You thought control was love, he interrupted quietly. You thought lying was power. But you forgot who taught you stability in the first place. She started to cry. You hate me. He looked up finally, eyes steady. No. Hating you would mean I still cared enough to feel something. Rebecca dropped to her knees. Please, Jeff, please don't take George from me. He studied her for a long moment. Then he slid an envelope across the desk. Inside was a copy of the court filing, Alden versus Alden, custody petition. Below it, a smaller envelope. Inside that, a single photo, George at the park, smiling, holding a kite Jeffrey had helped him make years ago. Don't worry, Jeffrey said softly. He'll know you loved him. He'll just finally know who protected him too. He stood, walked past her and left her there, sobbing on the office floor. That night, Jeffrey sat at home in the quiet, staring at a framed drawing George had made, a stick figure family. Mom, Dad, me. The simplicity of it broke him more than any confession ever could. For all the revenge and planning, what he missed most was the sound of laughter echoing through the house. But some things couldn't be rebuilt. Some things had to be released. He poured himself a drink, not to celebrate, but to let go. She thought she'd broken him, but in the end, she only proved what kind of man he really was. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you would have taken a bullet for, if you've ever had to rebuild from the ashes of your own silence, remember this. Sometimes walking away is louder than any revenge could ever be. Don't just watch stories like this. Subscribe, because real strength doesn't come from shouting. It comes from surviving what others swore would destroy you. As Jeffrey turned off the lights and sat in the dark, his phone buzzed once. A new message. No name. Just 3 words. You're not done. He stared at the screen, not afraid, not surprised. Just ready. Tulsa's late autumn air turned sharp and gray. The leaves along the suburban streets had begun to rot underfoot, the smell of damp wood and silence filling every corner of the Alden house. It had once been a home. Now it was a monument to mistakes. Rebecca barely left the house anymore. Every time she tried to step outside, whispers followed her like shadows. That's her, someone always murmured, the one who cheated, the one who lost everything. Derek had disappeared completely. No calls, no texts, no apology, just gone. Some said he fled to Arizona to escape the fraud charges. Others said he sold his car and took a bus south. Whatever the truth, one thing was certain, he'd left her with nothing. Nothing but silence. Every morning, Rebecca walked past George's empty room. The scent of his shampoo still lingered faintly on the pillowcase, a ghost of innocence she no longer deserved. She'd agreed to the custody terms Jeffrey proposed. She hadn't fought him in court. The lawyers told her she could have, but something inside her had already surrendered. Because for the first time, she understood what she'd thrown away. Not just a husband or a father or security, but the one person who'd believed in her when no one else did. And Jeffrey didn't celebrate the victory. He'd moved into a quiet apartment downtown overlooking the Arkansas River. Sparse furniture, clean lines, a few plants that didn't ask for much. It was the kind of place that reflected him perfectly now, organized, silent, deliberate. He worked, ate, and slept like a man on autopilot. People at the firm said he'd changed, not colder, but quieter. Like someone who'd seen through the noise of the world and decided not to answer it anymore. Sometimes, when he picked up George from school, he'd catch himself staring. The same brown eyes, the same dimple on the left cheek. He loved that boy more than he could ever explain. But in the spaces between laughter and bedtime stories, grief still lived quietly. He hadn't lost control of his life, he'd just lost the version of it he'd built around a lie. One Saturday afternoon, he got an unexpected visit. A knock at the door. When he opened it, Rebecca stood there. Her hair was pulled back, her face pale, her eyes swollen from sleepless nights. She looked smaller somehow, not physically but spiritually, like someone who'd finally run out of ways to lie to themselves. "I know you don't want to see me," she said softly, "but I need to give you this." In her hand was a box, small, wooden old. He hesitated, then took it. "What is it?" Rebecca swallowed hard. "Something that was supposed to be yours years ago." She turned and walked away before he could ask anything else. Inside the box was a bundle of letters, tied with twine. Some had his name written in shaky handwriting, Jeffrey. Others were addressed to Daddy. He sat down slowly, hands trembling as he untied them. The first few letters were from George, school drawings, cards Rebecca had kept hidden. But the last letter stopped him cold. It was from Rebecca's mother. "Jeffrey, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but you need to know the truth before this family destroys you." The paternity test was altered. I tried to stop Rebecca, but she wouldn't listen. She said she'd rather lose her soul than her comfort. "Please, don't hate her. She doesn't know who she is anymore." The paper was thin, fragile from age. He set it down and stared out the window, rain streaking the glass like lines of regret. He'd already known the truth, but seeing it written in someone else's hand brought a different kind of ache. Not anger. Just exhaustion. He realized something then. Revenge had given him closure, but not peace. Because peace doesn't come from watching others fall. It comes from deciding when to stop watching. The next morning, Jeffrey took George for a walk near the old neighborhood park. They passed by the same bench where he and Rebecca used to sit on summer evenings, planning a future that never came. George ran ahead, laughing, chasing a pigeon that refused to fly. His small voice cut through the chill air like sunlight through fog. "Dad, look, I can run faster than the wind." Jeffrey smiled. "You already do, buddy." And for a brief second, everything, all the pain, all the betrayal, melted into something almost like gratitude. Because if he hadn't gone through all of it, he might never have understood what love without conditions truly felt like. When they got home, a letter was waiting in his mailbox. The handwriting was familiar. It was from Rebecca. "Jeffrey, I don't expect forgiveness. I just want to thank you for letting George know love doesn't come from lies. I'm leaving Tulsa for a while. Maybe forever. I don't know where I'm going, but I know I need to find the part of myself that used to believe in good things. If you ever tell him about me, tell him I'm sorry. Tell him I loved him in the only broken way I knew how. Rebecca." He read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in the same box she'd returned. He didn't hate her anymore. There was no point. The world had already done what revenge could never do. It had made her live long enough to see herself clearly. Weeks passed. Life settled into a quiet rhythm. Jeffrey rebuilt his firm, expanded his contracts, hired new staff. The gossip faded. The whispers moved on to someone else. On a Tuesday evening, George came running into his office holding a school drawing. This time, a new family portrait. It showed two stick figures holding hands, him and George. In the corner, a small heart drawn above the word, Mum. Jeffrey stared at it for a long time, then smiled faintly. "Let's hang this one right here," he said, pinning it beside his desk. For the first time in years, the office didn't feel empty. Because despite everything, he realized something that no amount of betrayal could change. He hadn't lost a family. He'd found the truth of one. And in that truth, he was finally free. Spring came early to Tulsa that year. The air smelled like rain and new beginnings, and for the first time in a long time, Jeffrey Alden didn't wake up dreading the day ahead. The pain was still there. It always would be, but it no longer ruled him. It had settled into something smaller, quieter, like an echo that finally learned its place. Each morning started the same way now: coffee, breakfast with George, and a slow walk to the park before work. The same town that once whispered about him now greeted him with nods of respect. Not pity, respect. People had seen what he endured, and they saw the grace with which he handled it. In a city that thrived on noise, his silence had become legendary. At the firm, business was better than ever. Jeffrey had expanded his designs into sustainable housing projects for low-income families across Oklahoma. Reporters called it a man rebuilding more than just homes. He didn't chase the headlines. He just smiled when clients said things like, "You've got a good heart, Mr. Alden." He'd learned that revenge could build nothing lasting. But kindness, quiet, deliberate kindness, could rebuild anything. One afternoon, while reviewing blueprints, his phone buzzed. It was a call from George's school. "Mr. Alden, your son wanted you to see something." When he arrived, George stood proudly beside a cardboard model of a bridge, simple, sturdy, painted sky blue. "It's called the Second Chance Bridge," the boy said, beaming. "It's for people who mess up but still want to cross to the good side again." Jeffrey laughed softly, but something in his chest tightened. Children had a way of turning pain into poetry. He crouched down, placed a hand on his son's shoulder, and whispered, "That's the best bridge anyone's ever built." The teacher smiled. "He said he learned it from you." That night, after George was asleep, Jeffrey sat by the window, staring out at the city lights. The world had gone still again, but this time, it didn't feel empty. It felt peaceful. He poured himself a glass of water, not whiskey, and pulled out the small wooden box Rebecca had once returned. The letters inside were worn, edges curling from time. He didn't read them anymore. He didn't need to. They were reminders of who he used to be and how far he'd come. He thought about forgiveness. Not the kind that excused the past, but the kind that released it. He didn't know where Rebecca was now. Maybe she'd left Tulsa for good. Maybe she'd started over somewhere quiet, trying to piece herself together. He hoped so. Because he finally understood something his pain had hidden. Wishing peace for someone who hurt you doesn't make you weak. It makes you free. A week later, he and George drove out to the edge of town where the tall grass met the river. It was the same place Jeffrey used to go when he needed to think. The sun hung low, bleeding gold into the water. George ran ahead, chasing a dragonfly, his laughter echoing off the bank. Jeffrey followed, slower, his shoes sinking slightly into the soft dirt. When they reached the water's edge, George turned around. "Dad, will Mom ever come back?" Jeffrey hesitated, looking out at the rippling water. "I don't know, buddy. But I think she's trying to find her way home, in her heart." George nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe when she does, we can build her a bridge too." Jeffrey smiled, eyes misting. "Maybe we already did." They stood there together, the sun setting behind them, not father and son defined by betrayal anymore, but two souls standing on the other side of survival. Later that evening, back home, Jeffrey received an envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a photo, George's school picture, the same one Rebecca had missed taking that year. On the back, in small, careful handwriting, were 3 words. "Thank you anyway." No signature. No plea. Just gratitude. He exhaled slowly, set the picture on the mantel, and whispered, "You're welcome." And for the first time in years, the weight in his chest lifted completely. The following month, Jeffrey was honored at a local charity gala for his firm's community projects. When the host introduced him, the crowd stood to applaud. He wasn't thinking about recognition or victory. He was thinking about the people who'd helped him get there, his employees, his sister who'd stood by him quietly, and most of all, his son, who'd taught him that love, once broken, can still grow in new soil. When he stepped up to the podium, he didn't speak like a man who'd won. He spoke like one who'd learned. Sometimes life takes everything just to show you what matters, he said. And if you've ever lost more than you thought you could bear, I promise you, it doesn't stay broken forever. You rebuild. One honest day at a time. The audience fell silent, the kind of silence that means people are truly listening. That night, after the event, Jeffrey and George returned home. The boy had fallen asleep in the back seat, still clutching the small trophy his dad had let him hold. Jeffrey carried him inside, tucked him into bed, and lingered for a moment by the doorway. The house was quiet again, but now it was the kind of quiet that meant peace, not loneliness. He turned off the light, walked to his study, and sat down at his desk. On the wall behind him hung George's latest drawing, the Second Chance Bridge, colored in bright yellow this time. Underneath it, in crooked handwriting, George had written, "For Dad, who didn't give up." Jeffrey smiled, closed his eyes, and finally let himself rest. Some betrayals break you, and some teach you how strong you really are. Jeffrey lost his marriage, his peace, and almost his faith in people, but he never lost his ability to rebuild. If you've ever stood in the ashes of something you thought would last forever, wondering how to start again, remember this: you don't wait for permission to heal. You just begin. And maybe that's why stories like this matter. Because somewhere, someone is learning to rebuild tonight, quietly like Jeffrey did. Subscribe to this channel, not just for stories, but for reminders that every ending still holds a beginning.